Okay, I don't see the button come up. Okay, cool. Welcome, 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 beautiful souls, to the unnamed podcast that we still have. So, hi, this is Rachel, one of your hosts, and I've got my co-host Diamond Drip over here. Say hi, Diamond.
Hey, hi.
So, um, we've had an interesting recording session. Let me just say that. So to all of those, if you're new to our podcast, we are here pretty much just to talk. And that is the whole point of this podcast is we wanted to be able to come together and go back and listen to all of our episodes prior to this because we slowly trickle how all of this came together. And our intro definitely talks about how we just felt that there was something missing, and it was this dialogue of having this real raw dialogue, like where we are in our lives at the current time, and as being women and being entrepreneurs, and you don't even have to be a woman to deal with stuff like this, but so we um we were chatting earlier about many things, and so we were like, hey, let's just talk about this topic of boundaries. And I say that, and I'm sure half of our listeners are cringing and wanting to hit the pause button or the stop button when I say that word, because right now, like, for me, anyways, boundaries has always been something that, one, being the age that I am, because if our listeners don't know who we are, I am a whole lot older than Diamond, but I am a Gen Xer. So, like, I'm in the middle stages of life. I've raised one kid, I'm raising two other kids. Like, I have a business, my husband has a business. Like, we've had all of these life's journeys. And so the boundary topic has always been one that in my prior space of living, we didn't talk about it at all. Like, I still am not sure why in that space we never had discussions of boundaries, which we really should have. But in the spiritual space, boundaries is talked about a lot. And a lot of it is because when you move from the physical aspects of life to the spiritual aspects of life, there becomes a different energetic space that you enter and a reality that you become aware of. So if you're going through this journey and things just aren't making sense, it's probably because the energetics are not making sense. And so when you start to kind of awaken or go through this journey, energy becomes your primary, like, barometer of how things work. Okay. And so especially if you're an intuitive or an empath or anything like that, boundaries become super, super important when it comes to the energetic space. And then that translates into the physical space. And so sometimes those happenings are not fun, and they're not pretty, and they're not easy, but they're necessary. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So is there anything you want to add to that?
I think you recapped it perfectly of where we're going with this boundaries conversation.
So, like we always do, like, we don't have a script for this. We don't have really an idea. We just want to go with the flow of it. And so I'll start with this heavy topic. You started the last heavy topic that we recorded. So for me, boundaries was never in existence when I was growing up or as a young adult. I was always I grew up in a very religious space, very controlled environment. And so in that controlling, boundaries were determined by the other forces that be in your life, not you. And so having boundaries was something that was like that topic, especially to a person who's of my age that's in the Gen X space. We don't talk about things like that. We don't talk about emotions. We don't talk about boundaries. We don't talk about, a lot of things, which we really do need to talk about. So there you go, Gen Xers. I'm just going to call you out on that. But because we are jaded as a generation, we there's so many factors for that. But we were often, the environments that we were in controlled how our boundaries were set. And so we didn't always learn to have very good ones. We didn't always learn to speak up about what our boundaries were going to be because they were defined for us in a lot of respects. And so when we became adults and we had our own lives, setting those boundaries sometimes was difficult. And especially for women, if you grew up in a religious controlled space, because you were told what you were supposed to do and how life should pan out and what things that, you should do it in a certain order, in a certain way, and with certain people, and that you weren't supposed to deviate from that. And when you did deviate from that, that's when the boundaries became reality. And so for me, when I remember the first time I really had to set a boundary, I was married and I had a child at the time, and um, I was told that I wasn't doing a good enough job. So why not just have the child removed from my presence and somebody else could raise them? And that somebody else was somebody I loved dearly. And her saying that to me, I was like, "Whoa, wait a second, so I finally, that was like the literal first boundary that I remember putting up, like intentionally putting a boundary and going, heck no. And I didn't speak to that person for quite some time. And they were not allowed around my child for quite some time. Now that resolved itself. And I'm glad that it did, but that was my first, and I was 25 at the time. So I was late to the game with that. And throughout life, those boundaries have shifted, especially when I got into spiritual work and especially working on myself. And I had to protect my energy. And I had to protect my energy a lot of times from my family because they were so used to me being a certain way and doing the things that I did. So when I decided I didn't want to do those things anymore, I didn't want to keep being that person, and I wanted to do work in a different space, and I wanted to live life a little bit differently. Changing that and setting those boundaries was not fun, but necessary. And now I'm on the other side of them, and they're a lot easier to make after you make the initial one. But yeah, so boundaries is it's no longer something I struggle with. I'll be honest with that. Like I did for a long time. I struggled with it. I even struggled with saying the word, like it came, that's why I said probably some of our listeners were cringing when I said that word at the beginning, because they're in that space where it's still difficult. And we get that. Like we get that it's difficult, and there are going to be people who it is more difficult, or situations where it is more difficult. And then there's going to be situations where it's going to be super easy to do it, and people will get on board or they won't. And when they don't, that's the talk. That's another discussion. But when they don't get on board, that's when it's difficult. So share with us a little bit, Diamond, about your boundaries and how you work in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, for sure. So like Rachel's all, I used to struggle with boundaries. I'm pretty good with boundaries now. I'm like, yeah, not so much in this camp. Boundaries are still they're still something that I am working towards, and two specific areas of my life really come up. So one is in relationship, specifically intimate relationship, and then the other one is with work. And so I'll start with the one that's easiest for me to talk about first, which actually is my intimate relationship. um and this is something that we're going to elaborate on, more in a future episode, but like garnering the support when you're going through this spiritual awakening process, because it is a process, it is a journey. And when other people aren't on that same path as you, it can be very challenging. We'll use that.
Great word right there. Great word.
And so for me, like having to set boundaries for my own energy, and you spoke to this a bit, like your energy becomes important when you're going through this spiritual awakening process. And so recognizing the people who, oh, someone had asked me a really good question. They were like, what? So she said it. She was like, what is your abundance word? And I'm still working to figure out what that is. I figured out what my abundance feeling is, but what's your abundance word? Whatever that might be for you. So reflection prompt for our listeners there, if you don't know what your abundance word is. And look at the things in your life, the people in your life. Are they enhancing whatever this word is, her word was peace. I'll use her example of her abundance word. So are they enhancing your peace, or are they challenging your peace? Because if it's the latter, then some things need to happen in order for you to continue to do this work, to go down this path. And so for me, my partner, he suffers heavily with depression and anxiety. And for our listeners who have been with us, they know that I struggled heavily with depression specifically. And so while I get it, I am no longer in that space anymore. And for me, it's one of those things of like, I get where you are and I want to be there for you in a loving, supporting, especially nurturing way, because that's just one of my gates. I'm a natural nurturer. Whenever I say I'm a Cancer, they're like, oh, you're blah, 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 blah. So apparently that's a Cancer thing too, like just being this nurturing, caring, like spirit.
We're over here too.
You know? So, but not but and I'm a nurturer, I'm this caretaker, and also I have to set limits, because when I am meeting you where you are in such a way that it is bringing down my energy, then I am not operating in my highest self, in my highest alignment. And I'm no good for, for my partner specifically. I'm no good for our daughter. I'm no good for our relationship, really. Like, I'm no good to anybody at that point if I'm doing that. And so for me, it's been very much a journey of figuring out what I need and when, especially because when we even look at our, right, we do modalities that help us with the language of these things. So when I look at our human design charts, I have emotional authority. So that means my solar plexus is defined. He does not have his solar plexus defined. And so what happens is he'll take on my emotions to a certain degree, because like he's in his depression. I wish that I could like put my optimism and happiness into the environment and it just absorb in him in the way that I want it to. I wish. But sometimes sometimes his energy is such that like I'll come to him and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I just learned this really exciting, awesome thing about human design. And sometimes it's even about him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you have the answers now. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I don't know why I want to talk to you. Like, and then, and then, and then, what I used to do, and I'm working at this. And so both of these areas that I'll bring up, I'm working on. But what I used to do was, well, since you're down here, I'll just come down here too, because obviously it's just going to be like me talking to a brick wall right now, trying to get through to you. So I might as well just not say anything. Or if I'm going to continue to talk about this, I need to adjust my energy in the way that I'm talking to you. And that's not healthy for me, because I'm literally dimming my light because your light is dim. And then we just walking around here all in the dark. Like,
I get you.
So, really working to honor my energy and recognize that, not every time I come to him with something that is exciting for me, he's going to be excited about it too, and not making him wrong for that. Because so many of us have been conditioned to make the other person wrong but just being like accepting. Fun fact, my daughter is emotional. So now I couldn't talk to her really before, but like as she's hit 7 and she's stepping more into like her intellectual understanding more, I'm like, mommy just did this really cool thing and she's my cheerleader now. I'm like,
That's awesome.
hey, you're all right. Okay. Like I can talk to you about some stuff.
You could run my family's chart and I could tell you none of them have that emotional. I can tell you right now just by what you're saying. And that's something I want our listeners to really key into is when something we say resonates with you, ask us about it, because oftentimes we're talking about charts or contract readings or other modalities that we've used, and we grasp this understanding, and we do find it humorous because the creator is very poetic in who we become partners with, who's twin flames for us, who's soulmates, all those fun things that you'll learn to navigate through. But coming to what Diamond said, I really want to validate this. People are where they are. And so if we're especially in an intimate relationship, and I'll speak, because I've been married for 25 years, I started my healing process about 5 years ago. And my husband is still very much entrenched in our religious upbringings. And so to walk away from that and to say, I don't necessarily ascribe to many of the things that you believe, especially for a dude, especially for somebody who's, I can tell you, has not got the emotional, he's not emotionally open with that stuff. At least those pieces. It was very difficult in the beginning. And it was a lot of clashing of the personalities and a lot of clashing of ideologies. But when I realized, okay, he may never be where I am, and that is okay. That's okay. Because where he is where he is in his journey. And I love my husband dearly, but he's one of those people like you have to drop the breadcrumbs and just let him find the breadcrumbs until he catches up with you. And that could take years. So you have to be super patient with him. But once he gets it, it's like it really clicks. And he is very articulate in how he comes about doing that. So when those things come to us in those conversations, I'm like, yes, finally we've arrived, now next step. But no, but it is looking at those energies and knowing that other people around you are not probably going to match your energies for a while. And you have to find those people that do to get you through at times. And you have to figure out how to regulate with those that don't. And I learned a very valuable tool, and I'm going to share with our listeners this tool. In when I was doing some coaching with an individual, they were coaching me, not me coaching them, but she likened it to like the dial on your stove. So think about your where you are emotionally with that. And so for me, like certain numbers mean certain things to me. So I know if I'm at certain numbers, this is where I'm vibrating at. So like I even have an abundance number that I have. So when you were talking about that, and so it was funny because the first word that came to me was flow. So I wrote it down in my little notebook. I was like, my abundance word. So I'll use that as like a barometer. So like, I love that question. Like, is this enhancing or not enhancing that word, that piece? And I correlate that to the dial, because there's times where in your growth that you're going to be maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, and everybody else around you is going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, sometimes negatives. I've even been around negatives. And so like looking at people that way, but understanding to not validate where they are in relationship to the fact that they bring you down, but just validating where they are is this is the stage that they're in, and we have to honor where they are because they're not you. And especially in intimate relationships. I mean, I know early on when I was going through this, I was advised a couple of times, well, why don't you just leave your husband? It'd be a lot easier. Because he's not an energetic match. I was like, no, like I love my husband. We're going through transitions like any couple, partnership should. And we have to learn how to navigate together. And we have, and there's been goods and bads and, all the in between. But that was really like eye-opening to me. That was the advice that I got, because our energies at times would clash. And there were times where I did lower mine and I was miserable. And then when I would bring them back to where I needed to be, honestly, everybody followed me. That's what I realized, is because we like being around people who exude love and joy and peace and kindness and all of those things. So if we're exuding that in our own vibration, then people want to come to that. So why not keep just bringing people to that? And that was a boundary that was really, really hard for me early on, was that if I was vibrating at a certain level and you didn't meet that, oftentimes I just wanted to cut you off. And I didn't want to, and there were times where I might have like distanced myself from people intentionally because where they were at the time is not where I wanted to be. And, there were people I did let go, that was the boundary that needed to be set. And I learned the lesson that I needed to learn from that person. And that's what I was getting to, is that these are lessons. Like, these people that are put in your life are lessons for us to learn. And if we're not looking at it as a lesson, we're just looking at it as, like I was told to walk away from my husband. If I'd have walked away, I wouldn't have learned a lot of the lessons I'm learning now, because we're getting closer together vibrationally. And I'm learning so much, and I'm learning things that from a male perspective and a masculine energy perspective that I've never understood before. But now I'm in a space where I can understand it and go, okay, I can see it that way. I don't know that. I don't, because I'm a woman, I don't know that, but I can see it. So I honor that. And so I appreciate you bringing up that, those tools that you had. And so I hope for our listeners, those tools. So, thinking about energetically, where are you? And where is somebody else, and honoring where you guys are at currently at that time, I think is super and super important.
Yeah, I love that you came with that, because it just helps solidify that. So I'll move on from intimate relationship boundaries, because that was that one. The work one for me is interesting because, as I'm sure I've mentioned at some point, the first business I created was a product-based business, which I always say allowed me to grow a successful business in the blissful ignorance of my own self-worth. Because you get a product, you know how much you want to make from it, and then that becomes the price. And there's really no negotiation. Like, yeah, you can run sales, blah, blah, blah. But like, at the end of the day, you have your profit margins.
Right.
And so when I switched to a completely service-based model, it brought out a lot of my own feelings of like worthiness, specifically unworthiness. And that forced me to over give and over, like, to prove that I had what it took to help the people that I was trying to help. And we live in a material world where you can't just give away everything for free. And even
Though people want us to, but we can't.
yeah,
We got kids.
you know, we have kids, we have water bills, we have like housing, like all of it. Like, nothing in this lifetime that we need to thrive and survive here is free. Everything. It costs something. This water bottle costs something. The Taco Bell I had cost something. So it's it's one of those things where it's like, now that I am in this space where so much, like, I genuinely want to help people lead better lives. And so the information is out there. Like, you can find information about your gates, you can find information about your gene keys, you can even, apparently everyone, like most people, because apparently like changelings and like there's a few specific people who can't really access the Akashic records, but like everyone can access their records apparently. So like, it can be done. It's just, do you want to get there painfully slow by doing all of the research and all of the things, or do you want someone who has the knowledge and can pinpoint exactly what you need to help you reach the transformation that you are looking for? And that's where we come in, right? Me with my modalities, you with your modalities. And so it's one of those things where like when I first got into human design, I was giving away so much information for free. Like I was doing, like, of course you do your beta client readings to make sure that like what you're saying is accurate. But at a certain point, right? Like, when does the beta stop? When have
Right.
you proven your hypothesis
Yeah.
right, that this is what you're supposed to do? And so that part was always hard for me. And it's still, and this is why I was like, you're good with it. And I'm like, I'm still kind of there.
Right.
I was I partner with a local nonprofit in DC called Temple Mother Earth. And so we were they have these community events where one of them is a potluck. So you can either buy a ticket or you can, you know, get in free with a dish. And so earlier that day, they also have microdosing Mondays. So I was already there. And so people wanted to like look at their charts. And I was like, oh, awesome. And I was working on my boundaries because I will give anybody a mini reading at any moment. I'm like, oh, you don't know your energy? Ooh, let me explain why this is important to you. And so because I was working on my boundaries, the person that I was looking at, they brought a friend and I saw that they both had a 3 line. And I was like, oh, perfect opportunity for me not to not do the thing that I'm trying to work on, which is
Right.
like, so I was like, I'll just talk about their commonalities because I'm still giving them information and insight that they need. I'm just not giving it all away.
Right.
And so what ended up happening was I had them pull their charts and then somebody else was like, oh, what are you doing? And I was like, do you know your time of birth? And then before I knew it, I like is like 6 to 8 people who were just around the table. They had all pulled their charts. I found a reflector, which if you're not into human design, that's like less than 1% of the population. So it's kind of like finding a unicorn.
Right.
And I was just giving information about like strategy and energy type. And I was in my flow state. And then the potluck started winding down and people were coming up to me afterwards and they were like, oh, this was really interesting, this is really helpful, like I'm curious to learn more. And like all of a sudden I was like, I do this for money. Like
Yeah. Right.
and, and it became this thing of like, you know, I gave the people the information that they needed through my business coaching, like experience side. I have the systems to where like them pulling their chart gave me the information I needed to follow up with them, you know, for the things. But like in that moment, being in a spot where it was like, I'm glad you enjoyed the information.
Right.
I live in a material plane and I do readings. And it was just like energetically, it was like, oh, I hate that I have to do this because I just want so badly to give you the information that you need to survive here. But also, I have to survive here. And so,
That's a
um,
wonderful sevens popping up in your chart, I can guarantee. I got them too, listeners. So believe me, I know everything she's talking about. And I want to go back to something because while I say like I have the control on it, there's only certain like aspects of my life that I have control of it. And I love that you talked about like the work thing, especially for practitioners. It's so hard for us because I have a client who is a practitioner in another space. And sometimes I interact with her clients and they want her to just constantly give, 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 give. And it's like, y'all, like she only has so many hours in the day. And I finally told her that in a meeting one time. I'm like, do you realize like you have the same 24 hours as everybody else does? If they don't get on board, that's their energy. That's not yours. Like you need to do this. And like she was in that place where she was transitioning from individual work to more group work because she could not keep up with the magnitude of people that she needed to work with. And I thought, man, I would love to be to that space. You know, like that's my next step. Like I want to be so far booked out that I have to do something different because I can't get to enough people. But in the 3D space, like I struggle with that, like with one aspect of our business. Like I really struggle with those business boundaries because of my upbringing. And I'm not trying to blame this on something else, and I'm really not, because it's my sevens in my chart, you know, that are wanting to hide and be behind the mask and all that fun stuff. But it also was the way I was trained, you know, being in the religious environment. You gave because that was what you were supposed to do, and you never really asked for anything in return. And I like had to come to this place that, um, you know, even in my own business, like I had to write myself a script of like what I was going to do in those situations. Because I was finding myself in those places too, when people were finding out, oh, I did this modality, or I taught meditations, or I did this or that. They're like, oh, can't you do that? You know, it's like they wanted to be a beta tester forever. And it was like, no. And so it was like, that was so super hard for me in the beginning to go, wait a second. And so like now, um, I don't do anything for free. Like, you know, I mean, I might do like the podcast or whatever, because we don't do ads and things like that. But I'm like, you know, I don't, like, my time is energy to me. And that's the way I look at it. It's so much energy to me, and I can give to you, but if you're not respecting that energy with some type of energy exchange, then I don't know that we're in alignment with one another at this juncture. We may be, you know, in 2 minutes, but not right now. And I think that's such a great boundary that we have to look at as entrepreneurs and business owners, especially those in the spiritual space, because we want to help so many people. But I oftentimes find, and I'm probably going to get a little flack for this from our listeners, but I oftentimes find people who want it for free don't really want the work. They just want the information. And we're using our energy on people who are not ready for transformation yet. And that's where I've had to kind of like process that in my brain, you know.
Oh, my heart. Oh, because one person just really came to mind. I keep giving her so many resources. I've pulled back and I like send links now, but it's like I'm like, did you do the thing? And she's like, oh, I've just been so busy. And I'm like, ah, why
Yeah,
aren't you doing the thing you said you wanted to change? And
right.
and like you said, like it's energy, like it's 1000%. So like I'm doing better now, especially with recognizing, you know, when I am in group settings of spiritual people, I'm like, oh, okay, you want to know something? Okay, does anyone else want to know? Like if once I get like two people who are like, oh yeah, I want to
Yeah,
know, I'm like, does anyone else? Because I'm not doing this again, like and restarting this whole thing over again. Like
right,
come now, or you got to check my website and see what I offer, because
right.
like you said, like it gets to a point energetically where it's like I'm drained and also I still have to pay my bills.
You're right.
so,
Yeah, absolutely.
so like
There's another space that I'm gonna like interject on this, and I think
yeah.
this kind of comes really good after this. And this is going to be specifically for our female audience listeners. So sorry, men, but actually men really should take heed in this as well too. So if you're a male listening to this, please stick around, because I think you should hear this, for yourself and for your partner. So, and that is in the self-care space, setting boundaries with that. Because I think as women, we do a shitty job take care of ourselves. We do. We take care of everybody else, but then we put ourselves last. And as like Diamond was talking about, even with her business relationships, sometimes we as practitioners, we get so involved in our businesses and helping others that sometimes we forget that we need a little bit of love and TLC ourselves. And I know when um, I'm kind of getting back into a space where I need to for my physical health, because I am going through a lot of like physical changes with, you know, just some wonderful changes of life, that like I have to be more aware of what I'm doing physically in order to have the energy to work with the people that I want to work with, and to be that energetic alignment with them. Because if I'm physically not well, then I energetically probably am not going to be as well as I could be. And so looking at that, like when I was early on in my spiritual walk, it was triggered because of health issues, massive health issues. And I was really focused on my health at that time. And not just my physical, but my emotional health. And I set a lot of boundaries, but one I really set, and this took some time. So this is the tip, and then we'll have to jet out of here because I know our episode's getting kind of long. Is my family didn't understand those boundaries. They didn't understand when I went to the bathroom and I got in the bathtub and I was going to take a bath and I needed 30 minutes to myself not to come knock on the door. Like my 7 or 8 year old at the time, he didn't know not to knock on the door. So I had to like actually communicate, imagine that, communicate what I needed to my family and say, hey, so like even now, it's almost invariably my family knows about a certain time in the evening. I'm going to mosey myself upstairs and I'm going to crawl in the bathtub. I almost take a bath every night because that's my time to just chill out and to regroup, to let go of the day, to like literally I have like a little ceremony where I just let the day go down the drain type thing, it's gone. And all the energies that I've worked with are all, that are not mine. They go back to whoever their owner is, and I'm done for the day type thing. And I joke about it, but I didn't do that early on. And so I physically struggled with that. And so setting those boundaries, telling your family members what you need, and giving everybody grace to adjust to that, because it can take time for people to adjust to that. And then like with the self-care aspect of it, finding those people, and it doesn't have to be us, it can be us. Like if you're wanting charts read or, human design done, or even just somebody to sit and, talk through things and heal through things. We both have modalities that we can help you with that. But finding someone to be kind of that third party person to you and your emotions and your boundaries and all the things that we've been talking about in our podcast lately, to give you wisdom and understanding from an outsider's view, absolute must. So whether it's a coach, a therapist, us, whatever, I don't care who it is, find somebody that you can trust and you can go to on a regular basis to say, hey, this is what I'm going through. What do I do? Because that was the most helpful when it came to boundaries for me. To wrap this episode up, and I'll let Diamond speak a little bit before we go, but to wrap it up for me was that I had somebody and I would say, okay, I'm struggling with this boundary. Do you have any suggestions of what I could do? Do you have any, other clients that have been dealing with this? What did they do? Like, can you give me some advice? Because oftentimes when we're in the trenches of setting boundaries, we don't see but from our viewpoint. And to be able to learn to see from others' viewpoint of what's happening to us, and having that third party, therapist, coach, whatever, being able to look at it and go, okay, this is what they're possibly thinking, and this is what you are thinking. Why don't we figure out how to do it this way? That was so helpful to me because I was only seeing with my lens at the time. Because I was so entrenched in what I was doing, I was forgetting that other people had their own lenses and own energy and where they were. And so that outside perspective was a huge part of self-care for me. So, Diamond, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I love that. And I'll make mine quick. You did a beautiful job recapping the self-care piece. I just want to hone in on something that you said that really resonated with me when it came to the work piece. And I think this is important for listeners if you're feeling like you are ready for that transformation and change. Two things: with a work boundary, especially for our spiritual leader listeners, like what you just said, because it just hit me so hard in the heart. Like when you said, like, it's an energy exchange. So when someone decides to make the investment, to book the reading, to have their contract looked at, to have their human, like whatever it is, to go to therapy, like you may not be paying out of pocket, but insurance is a thing. Like therapists don't do what they do for free either. But when you make that decision and you make that investment, you are saying to the universe, you are saying to yourself, I am ready for change.
Yeah.
And spiritual leaders, stop giving your stuff away to people who are not ready and energetically a match for the change and transformation that you are trying to provide. Like that hit me. That's going to resonate with me so deeply.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. Like it's one of those things that you have to pay attention to. So I just really wanted to highlight that is like, yes, yes, we are here to help you. And yes, a lot of spiritual leaders may struggle with those boundaries, especially apparently if you have a 7 in your chart somewhere. However, don't take advantage of that. Don't, like, be ready for what it is that you're stepping into, and be an energetic match for that. So I'll leave it there on both sides.
So if you got boundary problems, so do we. We all do. If we're all being honest, we all got boundary issues, but it's a work in progress. And that's what we all are, is a work in progress. We're here to all learn lessons from each other and to grow. And that's the importance of this podcast for us. As the one sharing it with you, is we just want to give you words of wisdom and love and experiences, and know that you're not alone on this journey. So if you want to reach out to one of us, make sure you look at the notes in the show notes down below, wherever, to the side, whatever. I don't know where they are on whatever application that you're watching this on now. There's so many apps that we have to put all this on. So wherever you are, click the button, follow, like, subscribe, whatever. But share this out with people who who need to hear this. And to the gentlemen that are listening in the audience, because I hope that there are some. I know there are some. I'm just going to put it out there. I know that you're out there listening. If you have a wife or a significant other or partner that is doing this, like, share this episode with them, share our episodes with them, listen to them, because it doesn't matter it doesn't matter which partner you're in this situation. If you're not going through the same thing that your partner's going through, it's difficult. And there are things that you have to have boundaries on. There's things that you have to be okay with at times. It's not that you're conceding to that, but it's there. Like, sometimes you just have to wait for them to catch up with you and be okay with that. And maybe there are times, where it doesn't work. But we all know that if we're working on ourselves and the people around us want to match that, I believe people want to match that energy with you. If they don't, then they probably shouldn't be there. And so if you're listening, please share this out, honor those where they are, and love them in the space that they're at right now. So that's what we're going to do with you. We love you guys, and we will see you on the next episode. So there we go. Bye.
Bye.
I never know how to end these things.
I know.